Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, Prologue, and chapters 1 and 2. In these chapters, I am abruptly dropped into a depressing and gory world on the Yale campus, of all things. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Joanna for commissioning this episode. Joanna had debated whether or not to have me cover this book or to cover the Shadow and Bone TV series, and ultimately decided that she was very curious for my thoughts on this, and I understand why, because what is happening? I will tell you all that I walked into Ninth House not knowing anything about it, not a drop. And I was very curious because you guys know I have already been kind of impressed at the way that Leigh Bardugo's writing has so clearly improved from when she originally wrote the Shadow and Bone trilogy to writing the Six of Crows, and then the two books with, oh my God, Rule of Wolves, and I can't remember the other one. Y'all know what I'm talking about. But there was just such a marked improvement, and there are a lot of writers out there that their writing improves over time because it's just what happens. But I feel like the improvement in writing with Leigh Bardugo is a lot more dramatic than I'm used to seeing. And I don't know if I just notice it because I really like her style of writing and the way that it's developed, so it speaks to me specifically in a way that I don't really notice when somebody's using a different style than what, personally appeals to me. But I had multiple moments in reading these first chapters where I had to stop and just take a moment to appreciate how beautifully written certain parts of this were. Especially, she really has a fucking way with a simile. It's the kind of thing that, is simultaneously deeply inspiring to me as somebody who wants to write, and also really intimidating, where I read it and it's so succinct and evocative with what feels like no effort that I'm like, oh, I'm never going to be able to do this. And I have to keep in mind, she wasn't always able to do this, she wasn't always here. But my God, this book already has started off in a way that has knocked me on my ass a couple times. And I had looked at the page numbers, and as you all know, I tend to try and keep it around 50 pages per episode or less. And for this recording, initially not knowing what the subject matter was, I could have read up to chapter 4 or up to chapter 3. And I thought I could manage up to 4 because it ended at page 54. And I got one chapter in and was like, oh yeah, no. No, sir, I'm going to have to stop this one a little bit earlier than usual. So this is 40 pages or maybe even 38 pages. And I think that is going to be plenty to be going along with because there is a lot to cover here. So we start off in the prologue, which she's doing that kind of bookend thing where you frame it with a event that has already happened, but we're not getting all the details on it. That's clearly something really dramatic and traumatic has also happened. And your appetite is whetted to find out. And then we step back and we begin to discover the events leading up to whatever happened here. I'm always a big fan of this method. It can be a little bit played sometimes, but it's used a lot for a reason. It's played for a reason, So when we start off for the prologue, we are with Alex, and the first line of this book is, by the time Alex managed to get the blood out of her good wool coat, It was too warm to wear it. Which is very good first line. However, as good as that is for a first line, for me, the second line overpowered it with its just gorgeousness. Spring had come on grudgingly. Pale blue mornings failed to deepen, turning instead to moist, sullen afternoons, and stubborn frost lined the road in high, dirty meringues. Yo, I'm sorry. I needed to stop. Literally, the second sentence, and I was like, pause. Give me a moment. Especially, I don't know if I have mentioned this, but this book being set on the Yale campus, I grew up in New Haven, Hamden area. So it's a kind of wild thing because she's referencing a lot of stuff I know intimately, and then a lot of things that I know theoretically, but have never either seen or I don't remember. I did take a tour of the Yale campus way back when I was like applying. I applied like as a sophomore and did not get in, which I'm not surprised by. But I remember just being kind of overwhelmed at the campus. And I feel like that is brought across quite well in the writing. There is so much to the campus in a way that, like, having gone to Carnegie Mellon, which is much, much more modern, there's just a really, really different atmosphere to it. And there's a sort of organization to the way it's laid out that feels like it makes sense and it was purposeful from the start. And the Yale campus it's really got the vibe of like, we added shit when we could fit it, where we could fit it. And it's all kind of part of the thing now, but doesn't really go together. So there are really distinctly different architectural styles just shoved up against each other. And there is like, while it's in the middle of the city and dropped in the heart of New Haven, because of the walls and because of the nature of Yale itself, it feels so separate from the rest of the city. And the immediate surroundings are these like really hip, cool restaurants and clothing stores and just the very elevated sort of like downtown feel. And then you go like 2 blocks and you've just got these like ramshackle apartment buildings and places that are like futon liquidation stores, you know, just like really janky, pressed up against this incredibly high-end sort of metropolis feel. And it's disorienting. There is something about it that has always sort of, for me, been a really nice like physical demonstration of the effects of not just gentrification, because it's been here, you know, it's not like it was brought in, but the distinction between what it is to live as somebody in poverty and somebody with means, and just how you can be so close in proximity and live an entirely different experience surrounded by an entirely different atmosphere. And you will have been a block apart your whole lives and your worlds do not relate at all. And that is kind of what's on play here with Alex. She is not part of the Yale world. And now she is, and she is not getting used to it very well and is feeling like quite a fraud. And I am very fascinated. So she is hiding out in a place called the Hutch. And this is one of the buildings for Lethe members. And I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. That's the pronunciation that the audiobook narrator uses. I read these first chapters on Kindle. And then I went and like re-listened for a little bit before recording this on audiobook. But I tend to do better starting something new by reading it in print. It gets me to focus. It has me like remembering names better because I see it written down. So I, you know, coming into it with the audiobook narrator, there's probably a few other things that I'm going to come across and be like, ooh, I was definitely pronouncing that wrong in my head. Now, I want to say, again, I took a tour of Yale. I do not remember. It has been it's almost 20 years now. And I don't know if the houses, like the colleges that they are living in, are actual places. Like, is Lethe a real building, or I don't know. I'm assuming it is, but I am not going to pretend that I am aware of it, that I remember what it looks like, or anything like that. So I'm going to be coming from a variety of places here, but I bet what I'm going to relate to most is going to be recollections of Alex's experiences outside of Yale, if anything. So she's here hiding out, essentially. And she is like injured, as we find out later. And it takes a little while for us to get to that, because we only get a hint by a line that says something about how she is so exhausted just going up and down the stairs that some days she doesn't bother to eat at all. No one came to check on her. There was no one left. And she keeps referencing whatever happened as the incident at the mansion on Orange, which do not know if that's real either, but either way. So again, talking about these like absolutely beautiful lines. She'd let the battery run down on her phone, ignored her classes, and watched the branches sprout leaves at the knuckles like a woman trying on rings. Ugh. You know what I'm saying? Like a woman trying on rings is the most succinct, simple sentence. And yet, what it's telling you is you're sliding a ring on and it doesn't fit. It doesn't go past the knuckle. And so there's this spot. And it's like, she doesn't have to elaborate. She just says the thing and you get it. But it's, I admire that kind of writing so much, when you can just say something and it opens the door to the full idea without you having to spell it out, very literally spell it out. So we find out what the guidelines for Lethe candidates are. High academic achievement with an emphasis on history and chemistry. Facility with languages and a working knowledge of Latin and Greek. Good physical health and hygiene. Evidence of a regular fitness regimen encouraged. Exhibit signs of a steady character with a mind toward discretion. An interest in the arcane is discouraged, as this is a frequent indicator of an outsider disposition. Should demonstrate no squeamishness toward the realities of the human body. And as we find out, she is none of these things. This does not describe her. Especially like the concept here of interest in the arcane is discouraged, as this is a frequent indicator of an outsider disposition, I find really interesting. Basically, how I'm interpreting this is, if you are interested in magic, it's like a signal that you feel like you aren't like everybody else, like you're, sort of above things or different. And they do not like that, which I find interesting, because clearly the people involved in this organization all have a superiority complex. I mean, it would be hard not to, as involved with the types of things that they are. Not only knowing about whole other dimensions of reality that most people don't, but also financially being in the stratosphere. There is nothing left to tether you to the fucking reality of being a person anymore. So I find that to be an interesting requirement. And I'm wondering if that's supposed to be more like, if somebody isn't a part of the flock, they are not going to work with us, and they're going to be somebody who tries to go their own way, and we can't have that. So I think we'll go with that second sort of, but anyway, I just thought that was a very nice, way to get us going. What is this? And I like that at the bottom it says, Morris Vincent Omnia, which it means death conquers all, but somebody had scribbled over it, and later on we find out that they scribbled over it with death fucks us all, which feels correct, feels true. So she goes and looks at the injury that she has, and there are teeth marks in her abdomen. Well, not abdomen exactly. It's in her torso. Let's see. The bruised girl lifted her tank top, the cotton stained yellow with pus. The wound in Alex's side was a deep divot, crusted black. The bite had left a visible curve that she knew would heal badly if it healed at all. And then her map had been changed, her coastline altered. I don't remember if this is like a line that somebody mentioned because they read it in this book and they repeated it in a recording and like mentioned it to me, or if this is a reference specifically to something, but that felt really familiar and I couldn't place it. So if anybody feels like, giving me a clue here, but yeah, she is in the midst of the onset of an infection and she is aware of it, but she doesn't know what to fucking do because, the idea of picking up the phone, getting a ride to the undergrad health center, the sequence of actions each new action would incite was overwhelming. And I was like, yeah, there is a lot that you would have to explain here. And I have a feeling it would lead to the discovery of a lot of bodies or simply the disappearance of a lot of people. And how are you going to like explain that? She just doesn't have a lot of options. And from what we've heard so far, she doesn't have a lot of people that would notice her missing. Not a lot of folks to miss her. I don't know if her mother is even still alive. We know that she grew up with a mother and no father. But yeah, bad scene. And she basically like presses on the infected area until the pain knocks her unconscious. And it says that was in the spring, but the trouble had begun on a night in the full dark of winter when Tara Hutchins died and Alex still thought she might get away with everything. And then we get a quote about the Skull and Bones. And I don't know. I think that this is a really well-known organization in theory. Like most people have heard of Skull and Bones and the way that like a lot of incredibly powerful people, presidents and moguls have come from Skull and Bones. And there's not really any clear like indicator what the deal is there, except in my opinion to uphold white supremacy in class, which I think is self-evident. But I think that there's a lot of mystique surrounding it and it isn't that deep. I think it's just we want to keep shit amongst ourselves. And you are part of the club. So welcome. And we will do everything we can to put you in the places that we need you to maintain what we've got going. And it's incredibly discouraging because like this is happening there's no way to like stop it. You know, there's no way to be like, you can't be friends with people. You can't have like clubs. You can't use networking to get, like there's nothing to be done. And it's just one of those things that always sort of causes this like wave of hopelessness for me when I think about it. So we'll go to chapter 1, Winter. Alex is late. She had fallen asleep in the library, woke up at 10:30, yelled shit super loud in the library and had to hustle her ass out of there. And she is going through the campus. We get some descriptions of like, you know, the people here. And there's another moment here I love. The campus had a way of changing faces from hour to hour and block to block so that Alex always felt as if she were meeting it for the first time. Tonight, it was a sleepwalker, breathing deep and even. The people she passed on her way to SSS seemed locked in a dream, soft-eyed, faces turned to one another, steam rising off the cups of coffee in their gloved hands. She had the eerie sense that they were dreaming her, a girl in a dark coat who would disappear when they woke. So, she has to go to this secret room hidden between a couple of actual, like, what's the word I want? Lecture halls. I'm trying to find the spot where it describes this. But Here it is. Yeah, sandwiched between the lecture hall and a classroom that grad students used for discussion sections. It was a forgotten remnant of the old medical school, which had held its classes here in SSS before it moved to its own buildings. The managers of the trust that funded Skull and Bones had sealed up the room's entrance and disguised it with paneling sometime around 1932. So she goes into this room and she gets sort of like, I don't want to say hassled, but just there's a dude at the door named Trip who's sort of watching, and he's very stoned, she can tell. And he has a vibe later that she describes as being like a golden retriever that just wants everybody to rub his belly. Like, there's no real harm in him. He's just goofy and so privileged that he's not connected with the world. And I'm really curious what's going to happen with him, because he feels like somebody that you could make into an ally if you figured out a way to use him, but you can't tell him anything. He doesn't seem like somebody that you can trust and let in on stuff. He's just somebody that you can like befriend and ask him to do you a solid here and there, and you'll give him a fucking 6-pack in exchange or something like that. So she goes in and we get, you guys, this really laid me out. I had a moment of, again, just what? All eyes were on the Haruspex, his lean face hidden behind a surgical mask, pale blue robes spattered with blood. His latex-gloved hands moved methodically through the bowels of the patient? Subject? Sacrifice? Alex wasn't sure which term applied to the man on the table. Not sacrifice. He's supposed to live. Ensuring that was part of her job. She'd see him safely through this ordeal and back to the hospital ward he'd been taken from. But what about a year from now? She wondered. 5 years from now. And this guy, basically what they are doing are reading his entrails and doing it in a live human being for stock tips, which I cannot even tell you. The like beauty of this metaphor is so overpowering. I swear to God, there's a lot of me having to take moments in the midst of this. And we find out they go after people who are mentally unstable because allegedly they are somehow like closer to the gods and able to come up with, you can, if you read their entrails, get more accurate information than otherwise. The Haruspecs called out a series of numbers and letters, stock symbols and share prices for companies traded publicly on the New York Stock Exchange. Later in the night, they'd move on to the NASDAQ, Euronext, and the Asian markets. Alex didn't bother trying to decipher them. The orders to buy, sell, or hold were given in impenetrable Dutch, the language of commerce, the first stock exchange, Old New York, and the official language of the bonesmen. When Skull and Bones was founded, too many students knew Greek and Latin. Their dealings had required something more obscure. And then we get our first real glimpse of Darlington. And not physically, but she thinks of him in a more direct way than she has thus far. Dutch is harder to pronounce, Darlington had told her. Besides, it gives the bonesman an excuse to visit Amsterdam. Of course, Darlington knew Latin, Greek, and Dutch. He also spoke French, Mandarin, and passable Portuguese. Alex had just started Spanish, too. Between the classes she'd taken in grade school and her grandmother's mishmash of Ladino sayings, she thought it would be an easy grade. She hadn't counted on things like the subjunctive. But she could just about ask if Gloria might like to go to the discotheque tomorrow night. I really did enjoy that because, same girl. Same. And it's interesting too, later on she calls herself a mongrel, and we find out that her mother is Jewish, but here's talking about her grandmother having Ladino sayings, but it's spelled Ladino, and I'm not sure if that's a reference to a subset or if this is something that is world specific for this fiction. I've never seen that spelling before, and I don't know what to think of it. But yeah, and this guy, the Haruspecs, is interrupted here by the sound of Scarface coming through the wall next to them. It's being played really loud. And this is when we get a glimpse of Alex's, like, other life. She must have seen Scarface 100 times. It was one of Len's favorites. He was predictable that way. Loved everything hard, as if he'd mailed away for a how-to-be gangster kit. When they'd met Helly near the Venice boardwalk, her golden hair like a parted curtain for the theater of her big blue eyes. Ugh, what a good line. Alex had thought instantly of Michelle Pfeiffer in her satin shift. All she'd been missing was a smooth sheaf of bangs. But Alex didn't want to think about Helly tonight, not with the stink of blood in the air. Len and Helly were her old life. They didn't belong at Yale. Then again, neither did Alex. And very interested, I am going to assume, because we hear that Alex was discovered naked, having taken fentanyl next to another girl who was dead. And I am guessing that is who Helly is, but I don't have, like, the idea that there was blood involved and why she would have been naked. I am not excited to find that out, because I feel like it could have been something that they were doing because they were under the influence, or it could have been something that they were taking advantage of, that somebody externally was dealing with because they were, you know, out of commission, essentially, or maybe handed over specifically because they were drugged up. Either way, it is a ugly proposition, and like I said, I'm not excited about finding out what was going on there. So they call this prognostication, and she's thinking about how wild it is that this is, like, essentially reading the future, but in a way more specific way that is not personal, and that it must work because these people rely on it and are seemingly succeeding using this, you know? Alex thought of Tony Montana soaking in his hot tub, speechifying. You know what capitalism is? Alex glanced at Michael Reyes's prone body. Tony, you have no idea. So then we hear about the Greys. The theater had 2 local Greys who always sat in the same places, just a few rows apart. A female mental patient who'd had her ovaries and uterus removed in a hysterectomy in 1926, for which she would have been paid $6 if she'd survived the procedure. And a male medical student. He'd frozen to death in an opium den thousands of miles away sometime around 1880, but kept returning here to sit in his old seat and look down on whatever passed for life below. Prognostications only happened in the theater 4 times a year at the start of each fiscal quarter, but that seemed to be enough to suit him. Darlington liked to say that dealing with ghosts was like riding the subway. Do not make eye contact. Do not smile. Do not engage. Otherwise, you never know what might follow you home. Easier said than done when the only other thing to look at in the room was a man playing with another man's innards like they were mahjong tiles. And we find out that she can see them in color, and Darlington is shook. This is like the only time that he has ever expressed any sort of deficiency, any sort of sense of her being better than him at anything. And when we're inside Darlington's head in the second chapter, we find out that he is actually really conscious of trying not to make her feel bad, and not, there's like certainly a sense of superiority in him, but it doesn't come from a place of like, of disdain. It comes from such a consciousness of the way he carries himself and sort of the legacy of his family, that he isn't just trying to do things for image. He genuinely believes in doing the right thing because that is what a gentleman would do. And he genuinely wants to learn because he's so curious about the world, not because he just wants to flaunt his knowledge and experience in other people's faces. It's a very wholesome sort of interest that I was glad to see did not come from a place of just pride or even pressure from family, you know, although we do get some pressure from family when we meet his grandfather. But anyway, Yeah, he can't see them in color, and he can't see them unless he takes this particular drug. And finding out that she can see them without the drug and that she can see them in color. This is just a whole other level than what he was expecting. And when I love this, she'd shrugged, knowing her nonchalance would make Darlington even angrier. "It's not a big deal. Not to you," he muttered and stomped away. And I really enjoy that she can't help but be delighted that he's jealous of her. And that doesn't feel like it's coming from a place of mean-spiritedness. It comes from a place of her feeling inferior all the time. And finally being able to one-up him. And it's just not something that happens. So she's going to really enjoy that shit. I don't blame her for that one bit. And again, we are in his head, but it's only been one chapter. So I'm giving him some credit on his attitude that might not bear out when we learn more about him. So we'll see. And she is looking around and realizing that in the midst of this, she does not know what she's doing, and that Darlington was able to teach her a few things for a couple weeks. And then he has been whisked away for reasons we do not know. And she doesn't have a good grasp of anything and doesn't remember, isn't prepared. So she's brought here to ensure that the symbols that are written on this circle that are keeping the Greys out of the area where this sacrifice, I know that's not supposed to be the word, is taking place. She doesn't know the symbols well enough to look at them and identify if it's done correctly. She hasn't been trained for long enough. And I think the vibe I'm getting is that she was supposed to be, in ideal circumstances, given a lot longer. And that has not worked out the way anybody planned. And she thinks for a moment about the dean coming up to her and tapping the handcuffs on her wrist and saying, "We're offering you an opportunity," when she's in the hospital bed, which when we find out how she was found makes sense. So prognostications were big magic, and her job was to verify the bonesman followed proper procedures. So she's watching this, and all of a sudden the Greys begin to have a reaction that she hadn't seen before, and from what she has heard of their behavior in these cases isn't normal. So this whole thing is so creepy, so deeply creepy. She hears this moaning sound, and for a moment, understandably, she is like, "Oh my God, this guy is going to wake up. He's going to wake up in the middle of this horrible procedure and look down and see his fucking stomach open and all of these weirdos in hoods standing around him, and he is going to lose his goddamn mind," because he is a paranoid schizophrenic. And if he remembers anything, the rest of his life he's going to be gaslit that this didn't happen, because he has got delusions. So it's just going to be, but this is going to be something genuinely that he had to endure. And there's also a nurse that is given a big check to give him the types of herbs, and there's geranium root and a dove's heart that have to be fed to him to sort of prep him for this. And there's a reference to her husband gambling too much at Foxwoods, which I do enjoy. And again, anytime they decide to reference something in Connecticut, I'm always going to be just shout out, what's up? So she's looking around thinking he's woken up, and that's not it. And she's also realizing nobody else is hearing it. Nobody else is reacting. And then she realizes that it's the Greys, and they are not in their seats anymore. They are leaning forward over the railing of the operating theater, their necks craned out, and their fingers digging into the wood, which begins to splinter a little bit later. And they are opening their mouths, and the sound that comes out of them, it's described as not human, more like insects. Alex thought of the wasp's nest she'd found in the garage beneath her mother's studio apartment one summer. The mindless buzz of insects in a dark place. Girl, there are so many ways you could have described this that would not have made me shudder like this. And that is what you went with. And that's what makes you a good writer, but also really have some mercy on me, because I can't. That is going to haunt my dreams. I know it. Like, I don't know what this is, but I hate it. So we also find out that nobody knows their history or their names. Let's see. It was easy for a Grey to form a bond, to attach itself to you, and it was more dangerous because she already knew these Greys' histories. They had been around so long that generations of Lethe delegates had documented their pasts, but their names had been redacted from all documents. If you don't know a name, Darlington had explained, you can't think it, and then you won't be tempted to say it. A name was a kind of intimacy. And I really like that wording, because the whole deal with like names have power is so, that line is so overused. Writing it as a name was a kind of intimacy is extremely cagey, but specific. And saying it's a kind of intimacy sort of sidesteps, like, well, I know lots of people's names and I'm not intimate. No, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's something. And that's part of what's so wild sometimes when you think you know people and you find out that they aren't actually called Patrice. That's their middle name and they go by that, but that's not their actual first name. There's just something that goes with it that is a connection to a person. So it turns out that these Greys show up as they were when they died. So the woman has her belly cut open, and the boy is just like fully dressed, because apparently he froze to death when he was like fully clothed. So this poor woman is like out here buck naked, and he's standing next to her, and like, I think he's got like even a coat on or something. A sloppy bottle green jacket and stained trousers. So their mouths open to a point where it looks like their jaws are unhinged, and they are arching forward like they are trying to push their heads through the circle that has been drawn to keep them out. And the whole room is feeling like it's vibrating, but only she can see them. And this is her job, is to ward against these things. But again, she is not prepared. So she's looking at this, doesn't know how to deal with it, thinking something's happening here. And it says she could use death words in a pinch. Would they work on Greys in this state? She should have put salt in her pockets, caramels to distract them, anything. Basic stuff, Darlington said in her head. Easy to master. And then it steps up a notch. The halogens dimmed and surged. The room shook. Alex stumbled. The Haruspecs and the rest of the Bonesmen looked at her, scowling. So she is evidently feeling the shaking that nobody else is experiencing. One of them says, is our Dante drunk? And at the time I didn't get what this meant. A little bit later you find out that Dante is like the title that she's given. But she is going to yell for them all to run. And she herself is going to flee. She is not planning on doing her job because she doesn't know how. And then all of a sudden, the moans stop. The Greys are back in their seats and they are not looking around. They are ignoring her and everything is fine. And she finally loses it and vomits all over the floor. She'd been like holding back this whole time because understandably, most of us, I think, are not going to cope well with walking into a room where there's like a major surgery being done and you can like smell the blood and see the inside of his body. No, thank you. Not at all. So yeah, this is the straw that breaks her back and she winds up puking everywhere. This doesn't wind up finishing until 3 a.m. and they have a party afterwards. The Haruspecs might head directly back to New York City in the creamy leather seat of a black town car, or he might stay for the festivities and take his pick of willing undergrad girls or boys or both. She'd been told attending to the Haruspecs was considered an honor, and Alex supposed if you were high enough and drunk enough, it might feel like that was the case, but it sure sounded like being pimped out to the man who paid the bills. And I don't like that he keeps having this sort of title without a sense of him being a person. He's described at one point as having like a gaunt, lean face. And I'm starting to be like, is this dude just not human? Because I took it initially as the title given to him, like her being called Dante. But now I'm like, is this the word for the type of creature he is? Is he just not a person? And considering that it's like willing undergrad girls or boys or both, does he look like a person? Is this, when it's saying like willing undergrad girls or boys, is it just people who are involved in this, like in these organizations that attend the party and so they don't sense anything weird with him? The fact is that if he's been doing this for a while, then he's probably older. And that just the idea of like him being able to sort of take his pick and potentially being somebody who's like, they don't look like they belong at a college party. I'm just really curious how this all works. So we find out that this guy who had his stomach cut open, Reyes, he is wheeled out and they have like this kind of janky glamour over him that makes him look like AV equipment, but it's not really great. So if you look too long there, you can sort of start to see through it. If they hit like a bump or if they turn a corner and things shake, it's like the picture that they've laid over it sort of judders and you can see a glimpse of what's behind it. And the sound of like the life support system and everything is not muffled, so you can still hear that. And Alex is thinking about how if anybody stopped to take a look, they'd be in trouble, though Alex doubted it would be anything they couldn't buy their way out of. And that's really what it comes down to, right? I mean, that's just real life shit. That's not even like wild magical shit. That's just money will get you most of what you want most of the time. And we find out that like the glamour laid over this is something that is done by members of Manuscript, another group, which they are better at doing this kind of thing, and they are not like excited to share their secrets. So that's why it's not that good a spell. They're giving bare minimum to just get the job done and not give too many things out for free. So she's thinking about how she has to check on him once he's back in the ward and then in a week to make sure that he's like healing okay, that there hasn't been a casualty for over 100 years. Well, actually almost 100 years. A group of bonesmen had accidentally killed a vagrant during a hastily planned emergency reading after the stock market crash of 1929. Prognostications had been banned for the next 4 years, and Bones had been threatened with the loss of its massive red stone tomb on High Street. That's why we exist, said Darlington. We are the shepherds, Stern. But he'd cringed when Alex pointed to an inscription in one of the margins of Lethe, a legacy. NMDH? No more dead hobos, he'd said on a sigh. That is delightful. I do really like somebody having this sort of elevated story and then it's just brought to earth with a thud. And she's walking home and we find out that she's going to come back later and do some things to keep the Greys at bay. And we find out that they are attracted to things that are like life. Anything that is, as Darlington puts it, the sort of thing that indicates living, whether it's fucking, drinking, fighting. He talks about like sugar and sweets and things like that, salt even. And that places that feel like death, like graveyards, are not going to have many of these ghosts at all, because that's filled with reminders of death and they don't want that. And I really liked this because I know that graveyards are like prime spooky story, like, you know, but I have always sort of felt like graveyards feel so peaceful when I go to them that it just never really seemed like it made sense. You know, if you're somebody who does believe in ghosts, I'm always like, if anybody's haunting, they're not going to haunt a graveyard. Why would you do that? You would haunt a place where you used to live. You would haunt a place where something happened to you. You would haunt a place that, like, some place that a person who meant something to you lived. Any of those make sense. You're hanging on because you don't want to believe in your own death, or you have things you want to do and you can't do them in a graveyard. So this just made a lot more sense to me, and I like this. And she's just wondering about the Greys and what the hell happened. And it says the greatest gift Lethe had given Alex was not the full ride to Yale, the new start that had scrubbed her past clean like a chemical burn. It was the knowledge, the certainty that the things she saw were real and always had been. But she'd lived too long wondering if she was crazy to stop now. Darlington would have believed her. He always had, except Darlington was gone. Not for good, she told herself. In a week, the new moon would rise and they would bring him home. And I'm like, all right, what's happening here? Because at one point, there's a description in the prologue of like the stench of wild dogs. And I'm like, is this a werewolf thing? Is he, disappearing with the moon because he's transforming into something? Like, what's happening? But I don't know if that's anything that's going to be in this series. I don't know the nature of the magical lore here yet, and how much of the lore depends on creatures and the idea of things that are specifically like witches. It seems like it's just, if you know about the magic, if you're let in, you can do it. It's not about innate ability that is born within you, except in Alex's case with what she can do. And that's what makes her really particularly special. But anyway, this is when she leaves and runs into Trip, and we just get another beautiful description. There's also real quick before I get to that description, he's showing her a tattoo, like the Yale bulldog, and he asks, "You got any ink?" His sleepy eyes roved over her, trying to peel back the winter layers, no different than the losers who hung around ground zero, fingers brushing her clavicle, her biceps, tracing the shapes there. So what does this one mean? I definitely think that she has a bunch of tattoos. I do not know why she was at ground zero. I'm wondering if this was like related to her being able to see ghosts, and it was like something that she was trying to do some good, or somebody paid her. I don't know. But yeah, she tells him she doesn't have them, that it's not her thing. But later on, when Darlington is like meeting her and it's the middle of summer, she's got long sleeves and long pants on, and he's like, that's weird. But he doesn't press when she just says, I'm really modest. So let's see. I'm trying to find the description of him, because man, it is so beautifully done. Alex was supposed to remain civil, distant, and diplomatic. Lethe had made sure she would graduate without a cloud of student debt hanging over her. Trip was on the sailing team, a third-generation bonesman, a gentleman and a scholar, a purebred golden retriever, dopey, glossy, and expensive. He was rumpled and rosy as a healthy infant, his hair sandy, his skin still tan from whichever island he'd spent winter break on. He had the ease of someone who had always been and would always be just fine. A boy of 1,000 chances. Yo. That is one of those things that I'm like, I'm low-key gonna fucking like copy paste this to Rashawn and just be like, look, if you are not going, you're not going to believe how beautifully this is put here. A boy of 1,000 chances. spoke to my soul and elicited this kind of rage from me that I was just not ready for. It's such a understated way of putting it, you know? Oh man. Anyway, so then we get another moment of her thinking about Darlington, because she's eating this ginger candy now to try and help with the nausea, which she's still dealing with. And she saw his body sprawled in front of the great stone fireplace at Black Elm, which we find out later is like his ancestral home. And it has been parceled out and sold. And there's like a mansion and some gardens left, but much less than there used to be. He was on his back, eyes closed, head resting in the cradle of his arms, toes wiggling in time to the music floating around the room. Something classical Alex didn't know, dense with French horns that left emphatic crescents of sound in the air. I mean, really? I mean, come on. For real? Like, ugh, disgusting. That's so beautiful. I just hate her. Leigh Bardugo, why do you do this to me? So, we find out that there's like an issue with her smelling like magic. And it is a really distinctive smell that clings for a while. And if she goes back to like her dorm, her roommates will definitely notice and be like, what the fuck? And it's described as something like the electrical crackle of ozone after a storm, coupled with the rot of a pumpkin left too long on a windowsill. The first time she'd made the mistake of returning to the suite without showering, she'd actually had to lie about slipping in a pile of garbage to explain it. And she's got two options for where to go here. There is Il Bastone's spotless bathroom. Il Bastone, I'm hoping I'm saying that right. And that place is like a refuge of a type that is kind of outstanding. A 3-story mansion nearly a mile from the heart of campus that served as Lethy's main headquarters. Oculus would be waiting there tonight, the lamps lit, with a tray of tea, brandy, and sandwiches. It was tradition, even if Alex didn't show up to enjoy them. But the price of all that luxury would be dealing with Oculus, and she just couldn't handle Dawes' clenched jaw silence tonight. Better to return to the dorms with the stink of the night's work on her. And I'm very interested to actually meet Dawes, because we hear the phone call between them later, which is very tense. But it's unclear if there is like a beef or if they just don't really relate, you know? So she's deciding whether she wants to go there or to the dorm. She finally settles on going to the dorm. And then she gets this phone call. And, well, no, I misspeak. She checks her phone and realizes that they have been trying to reach her. Dawes has sent texts every 15 minutes. So she finally calls in. Oculus speaking. Dante replies, Alex said, feeling like a jackass. She was Dante. Darlington was Virgil. That was the way Lethy was supposed to work until Alex made it to her senior year and took on the title of Virgil to mentor an incoming freshman. She'd nodded and matched Darlington's small smile when he'd told her their code names, pretending she got the joke. Later, she'd looked them up and discovered Virgil had been Dante's guide as he descended into hell. More Lethy house humor wasted on her. There's a body at Payne Whitney. Centurion is on site. A body. Yes. Like a dead body? Yes. Dawes was clearly trying to sound calm, but her breath caught, turning the single syllable into a musical hiccup. And we have this beautiful little aside here of Alex wanting to ask, "Are you messing with me?" And a memory of a girl asking her to meet at this restaurant after school. I want to see if you can talk to my grandma. We used to go there a lot and I miss her so much. And bless little Alex going to the spot, waiting for her and finally realizing she's not showing up. She's just fucking with her. And she's like, it's just such a bleak moment. She isn't even like, they don't just show up and mock her. She's just forgotten about. And there's something so much more bleak about that in a way, you know? And Dawes tells her possible homicide, and she hangs up and she's just like, I don't know what to do about this. A homicide. Darlington has not prepped me for this. And then we go to chapter 2, last fall, and we find out that Darlington's name is Daniel Arlington, but apparently Darlington is what he goes by. I don't know if he had created this nickname for himself. It was something that just happened. Don't know. But this, he calls her Galaxy Stern. Alex's full name is Galaxy. Why would you do that? Really, genuinely. Like, why would you do that? That's just, there are just some names out there, folks, that I really want to like slap and shake the parents. Like, come on, why? And we find out that Darlington had been really excited to select who was going to be his Dante, and was like very methodically going through all of these applications, trying to find somebody suitable, and genuinely making an attempt to stay really open-minded about it. He is somebody who takes things very seriously, is really organized, and believes in what he's doing, and enjoys it. This like sort of tedious process speaks to his soul and is something that he considers a bit of an honor, and is just like, it's just special, you know? And then he gets a phone call and they say, we found your Dante. And he's like, what the fuck? But he keeps calm. Like, he's mad inside, mad as hell, but he doesn't let any of that show. And he asks, well, who is it? I have all the files here. And they're like, she's not in the file. She never applied. She never finished high school. She can see grays. And Darlington interprets this initially as the fact that they're saying this girl can brew the elixir to see grays, which is a hugely difficult thing to do. And he almost died when he did it wrong one time. And finally, this guy says, no, she can just see them. And he's like, oh, fuck. And the guy talking to him, who is the dean, Dean Sandow, who I misread as Dean Shadow initially, and I feel like that still works. He isn't happy about this either, but this kind of benefit is just so unheard of. They can't let her get away. And she is in a uniquely exploitable condition. So let's see. Oh, right here. You know the positions we're in. This is an important year for Lethe. We need everyone happy. Lethe was responsible for keeping watch over the houses of the Vale, but it also relied on them for funding. This was a re-up year, and the societies had gone so long without an incident, there were rumblings that perhaps they shouldn't dip into their coffers to continue supporting Lethe at all. I'll send you her files. She's not the Dante we might have hoped for, but try to keep an open mind. Of course, said Darlington, because that was what a gentleman did. Of course I will. He tried to mean it. Even after he read her file, even after he'd watched the interview between her and Sandow recorded at a hospital in Van Nuys, California, heard the husky, broken woodwind sound of her voice, he'd tried. She'd been found naked and comatose at a crime scene, next to a girl who hadn't been lucky enough to survive the fentanyl they'd both taken. The details of it were all more sordid and sad than he could have fathomed, and he tried to feel sorry for her. His Dante, the girl he would gift with the keys to his secret world, was a criminal, a drug user, a dropout who cared about none of the things he did. But he'd tried, and still nothing had prepared him for the shock of her presence. And we get this really fun bit where he's walking through the storm, and she's apparently got 2 roommates, and it's like whatever space they're sharing is big enough to need a couch. This is definitely not the dorm room I was picturing. And as he sees all of these girls, he knows who they are, what their credentials are, what their extracurriculars were, the scores they got on their SATs. And I find this very, very fascinating because it's not only showing us how much data he retains when it's not necessary to retain it anymore, but also how completely alien Alex is to this place, how little she fits in with any of the folks here. She just isn't even on the map, you know, what all of these people's life experiences are and what she has lived through. I mean, there's no resemblance. It's just, you know, so it's a nice sort of like reminder that she is not amongst peers here. And he is as acutely aware of that as she is. It would be easy for him to sort of like, for him to be written as somebody who kind of forgets that. And occasionally he forgets like the context of things. So he'll reference something and realize that she doesn't get it. But in the midst of it, he is always aware that she isn't one of them. And that feels very true to me, you know? And he basically walks in and pretends to be her cousin. And she boxes him into giving her $300 to pay for the couch for her roommates. And when they walk out, he tries to be like, you owe me. And she's like, get the fuck out of here. You definitely can afford it. And also, what are you fucking with me for? You were testing me. And he's like, well, that's my job. And she says, no, it's your job to teach me. And that is not the same thing. And he's kind of like impressed by this. And this is when he brings her on a tour of like the campus and surrounding neighborhood. And he notices the tension that goes in and out of her depending on where they are. And when they reach the New Haven Green, which is someplace that I have been a billion times, this area is free of grays. And so you can see her like shoulders drop and you can see her relax. But when they leave, she goes right back to that tension she had had. And they just discuss a little bit whether or not they go to church. He does go, but it's not because he believes. And he was like, his grandfather told him the working man believes in God and they expect us to also, which I thought was fascinating. Just like very blatantly saying, we just need to look away. So fucking do what you need to do to look the way. There's something I almost admire about that. Just being really, there's no pretension. I am doing this for the vibe, not because I believe, and I'm not going to pretend to believe, and it's not even about that, you know? So, and he finds out that she kind of skimmed the books he gave her, and he's like, she really needs to fucking read those because that's necessary, and I think she's not quite getting how crucial it's all going to be. Which we do find out later on that she does give that more attention, but this is not natural for her, you know? And when she asks why here, he says, magic in the early 1800s was moving from the old world to the new. They needed some place to store their knowledge. No one's sure why New Haven worked. They tried it in other places too. This is where the magic caught and held and took root. Some people think it's because the veil is thinner here, easier to pierce. And that there's no real answer here. It's just genuinely who knows, but he can't say that. And there's so many societies, I had no idea. He says there's over 100, but we don't concern ourselves with most of them. They do a little community service. They have dinners. It's the ancient eight. The houses of the Vale are the ones that we give a shit about. And then each of their tombs, their like sort of main campuses, I guess is the way to say that, are built over a nexus of magic where the power eddies. And I love this. She's like, you telling me this has all been going on for more than 100 years and no one has figured it out? And he's like, oh, I mean, lots of people are like trying to figure it out. Lots of people know about the organizations. Like there's lots of books written about the Skull and Bones. We welcome that scrutiny because they are all very far off from what's actually happening. And everything that we are doing is actually a lot worse than what they think. As soon as the gate shut, darkness enveloped them. From somewhere beneath the house, a howl sounded, high and hungry. Galaxy Stern had asked what she was in for. It was time to show her. And that is the end of chapter 2, ladies and gentlemen. So yeah, I'm going to have to be a little bit more modest on the number of pages I read for each of these episodes, because I have a feeling shit is going to be dense. It's going to be very dense, and I'm very into it. It's just genuinely no idea where this is going. So, yeah, looking forward to this. So thank you very much, Joanna, for commissioning this. Appreciate it a lot. And I hope that you enjoy the coverage. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.